I'm still here, Dad.
The soldier was lucky to survive and make it home after the battle. But when he awoke from his coma, his wife had left with another man. He had lost his right to be a father, and he had nearly lost himself. When everything collapsed, all that remained was a small hand gripping the edge of the door and a whisper that said, "I'm still here, Dad." From that moment on, the soldier began his final battle, not to win, but simply to stay. White light slipped through the narrow gap in the window, brushing across Daniel Parker's face like cold fingers, rousing him from sleep. He opened his eyes, but the world was anything but clear. Everything felt like shattered fragments, the steady beeping of machines, the sharp smell of disinfectant, and a strange heaviness in his limbs as if they no longer belonged to him. Mercy Heights Rehabilitation Center, a place where returning soldiers tried to find themselves again. Daniel struggled to remember. Images flared and vanished, a thunderous explosion choking clouds of sand and dust, and then darkness closing in. His memories were now nothing more than scattered patches of color, impossible to piece together. "Good morning, Lieutenant Parker." That voice, cold as ice. Daniel turned his head, every movement demanding an extraordinary effort. Rachel, the wife he had loved, the woman who had promised to share every rise and fall of life with him, stood near the door, her face utterly expressionless. Beside her stood a man in an impeccably tailored suit, Trent Wallace, a business partner Daniel had once considered his closest friend. "Rachel." His voice was hoarse. She did not come closer. She simply opened her handbag and took out a stack of papers. "You need to sign these." Daniel looked down at the blurred words. Divorce papers. Those two words pressed down on his chest like a crushing weight. "Rachel, what's going on? I can't go on living like this, Daniel," she said softly but firmly. "I've tried, but I can't take care of someone. A lifelong burden. A burden." The word cut straight through his chest, leaving a sharp, searing pain. Daniel had charged into battle-faced deadly danger to protect freedom, to protect his family. And now that very family was calling him a burden. "And Ellie," he whispered. "Where is my daughter?" Rachel glanced at Trent before answering. "She'll stay with me. You're no longer capable of raising a child." "No." Tears welled up hot and burning. Daniel tried to clench his hand, but his trembling fingers refused to obey. "Don't take her away. Please." Just then, a small shadow slipped quietly into the crack of the doorway. Ellie, his 5-year-old daughter, stood half hidden behind the doorframe, her wide eyes fixed on her father. In those eyes was fear, but also something resolute, something unwilling to let go. "Daddy." That tiny voice was like a lifeline thrown into an ocean of despair. "Ellie, go with your mother." Rachel snapped her tone hard, but the little girl did not move. Her small hands clutched the doorframe tightly, as if loosening her grip for even a moment would mean losing her father forever. Daniel felt his heart shatter and mend at the same time. He could no longer protect his country. He could not save his marriage, but he could not lose his little girl. "I won't sign," Daniel said, his voice shaking but resolute. Rachel frowned. "You don't have a choice, Daniel. Look at you. You can't even take care of yourself. But I'm still Ellie's father." Every word he spoke was heavy with resolve. "And I will fight." Trent stepped forward, placing a hand on Rachel's shoulder in a possessive gesture. "Parker, don't make this harder than it has to be." Daniel looked straight into the man's eyes. The man he had once shared beers with, laughed with, talked about dreams with. Now, all he saw was a stranger. After they left the room, sank into a heavy silence, Daniel stared up at the stark white ceiling as tears streamed down his face. He had once been a soldier, strong, brave, always ready to sacrifice. Now he was just a broken man, abandoned amid the wreckage of his own life. But within that wreckage, there was still a small glimmer of light, the image of Ellie, the daughter who refused to walk away. And that fragile light was enough to ignite a fire of determination in his heart. he would come back. For his child. The third-floor apartment in the aging building on Maple Street no longer looked the way it had when Daniel left. The paint was peeling from the walls, the wooden floor creaked with every step, and the old heater worked only when coaxed into life. But it was the only place he could call home a roof over the heads of himself and Ellie. On their first night back, Daniel lay on the narrow bed listening to the steady rhythm of his daughter's breathing in the next room. She had fallen fast asleep after a long, unsettling day. Sleep, however, would not come to him. Instead, images came rushing in dry yellow sand, the roar of armored engines, and the moment when everything began to shake. He jolted awake, his heart pounding like a drum. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands trembling. The nightmares of the battlefield refused to release him like unseen ghosts lurking in every dream. Daddy. The small, gentle voice from the doorway made Daniel turn. Ellie stood there, clutching her stuffed bear, her wide eyes filled with worry. Go back to sleep, sweetheart. Daddy's fine. He tried to smile, though his voice still shook. She walked over, climbed onto the bed, and lay down beside him, placing her small hand on his chest. I'm here with you. Daniel's heart melted. Only 5 years old. Yet Ellie understood her father's pain in a way grown-ups could not. He wrapped his arms around her and let silent tears fall. On the third day after returning home, the doorbell rang. Daniel opened the door to find a woman with neatly tied blonde hair, a crisp white blouse, and a medical bag in her hand. Hello, Mr. Parker. I'm Olivia Morgan. The nurse Mercy Heights is assigned to assist you during your at-home recovery. Her voice was warm, so unlike the coldness he had endured from Rachel. Daniel hesitated, then nodded and invited her in. Olivia did more than help him with physical therapy, the stretching exercises, the careful grip training, the slow, deliberate steps. She also listened with patience. She did not ask many questions, but her eyes showed that she understood. You're doing very well, Olivia said one afternoon, as Daniel struggled to hold a glass of water without spilling it. Progress isn't always obvious, but it is happening. Those words of encouragement were like small bricks laid one by one, rebuilding a sense of faith he had thought he'd lost. Olivia was also kind to Ellie. When Daniel suffered severe headaches, a consequence of his brain injury, and could not care for his daughter, Olivia stayed. She read Ellie stories, cooked simple meals, and created a safe space that both father and child desperately needed. But the calm did not last. One morning, Daniel received a letter from Rachel's attorney, a petition for full custody. The stated reasons were filled with harsh language. Father is incapable of caring for the child, unstable health condition, unsafe living environment. Daniel clenched his teeth, gripping the paper until it crumpled. But what truly enraged him was not the accusations, it was the small print at the bottom of the page, referencing the disability benefits he was about to receive from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Olivia, who was preparing lunch in the kitchen, noticed his expression and came over. What is it? They don't want, Ellie, Daniel whispered bitterly. They want the money. She placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle but steady. Then you have to prove them wrong. But how Daniel looked down at his trembling hands, hands that had once held weapons, protected his fellow soldiers, and now could barely manage the simplest tasks. How could he convince a court that he deserved to raise his daughter? That night after Ellie fell asleep, Daniel sat alone in the darkness. Troubling thoughts rose up. Was he being selfish by keeping her with him? Would life with a disabled father ever be better than the comfortable life Rachel and Trent could provide? Then he remembered Ellie's eyes, those steadfast eyes that refused to leave her father's side. She did not need a perfect father, she only needed a father who loved her. And Daniel loved his daughter more than anything in the world. He stood and walked into Ellie's room. She lay curled up, her arms wrapped tightly around her stuffed bear. Daniel bent down and gently kissed her forehead. I promise you, he whispered, I won't lose you. It was a promise not only to Ellie, but to himself, A vow that no matter how closely the ghosts of the past clung to him, no matter how dark the present became, he would fight. For love, for family, for the future. And this time, he would not let anyone take that away. The next day, another packet of documents was delivered to Daniel's apartment. Daniel handed the papers to Olivia. As she read, her expression gradually grew serious. "They've attached copies of your medical records," she said slowly. "But these notes," she frowned. "Have you ever had symptoms like these? Uncontrolled outbursts of rage, tendencies toward reckless behavior, extreme reactions to minor noises?" No, Daniel clenched his fists. "I have nightmares. I have headaches. But I've never done anything that could endanger Ellie." Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder. "I believe you. But someone has interfered with these records. These notes don't match what I've observed in you at all." Anger began to boil inside Daniel. Someone was playing dirty, and he knew exactly who it was. 3 days later, Daniel received a text message from an unfamiliar number. "Meet me at the Riverside supermarket parking lot at 6 p.m. We need to talk." Trent. Every instinct in his body told him to refuse, but some part of him, the part of the soldier that remained, wanted to face the enemy head on. He needed to know what game they were playing. When Daniel arrived, Trent was already waiting beside a sleek sedan. The expensive suit, the smug smile, he was the very image of the success Daniel once had and had now lost. "Parker," Trent said with a nod, his tone suspiciously friendly. "Thanks for coming." "Don't pretend to be polite with me," Daniel replied, his voice cold as ice. "What do you want?" Trent smiled, but his eyes were icy. "I just want to help you. Look at you, you're struggling with everything. Ellie needs a stable family, a bright future. Rachel and I can give her that. My daughter already has a family." Daniel said, his fists tightening. "She has me." "You." Trent scoffed. "You can't even take care of yourself. You really think you can raise a child? Stop lying to yourself, Parker." Each word stabbed into Daniel's pride, but he held himself back, drawing a deep breath. He could not let emotion overpower reason. "I know what you did to my medical records," Daniel said, his voice trembling with restraint. "You falsified them." Trent shrugged casually. "Prove it. Though I suppose you can't, can you?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "The truth is, Parker, you've already lost. The court will see that an unstable man like you is unfit to raise a child, and when that happens, your disability benefits will go to Ellie's legal guardian. That means Rachel. That means me." Rage flared like a consuming fire. Daniel wanted to lunge forward, wanted to make Trent understand that he was not someone to be trampled on. But just as he stepped closer, Trent backed away, and Daniel realized it. The phone in Trent's hand was recording. "Go ahead, Parker." Trent taunted, his voice dripping with provocation. "Show me just how dangerous you really are." Daniel stopped, his heart pounded, cold sweat running down his back. It was a trap. If he let his anger take over, Trent would have proof against him. Slowly, Daniel took a deep breath and forced himself to step back. "No," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I'm not who you think I am." Trent looked at him with clear disappointment, then turned off the phone. "What a shame. But it doesn't matter. I already have enough evidence." He turned away, got into his car, and drove off, leaving Daniel standing alone in the empty parking lot. That evening, Daniel sat in the darkened living room, his head resting in his hands. He had fought on distant battlefields, faced dangers he could see, but this enemy cunning hidden behind legal maneuvers and lies left him feeling more helpless than ever. Ellie came out of her bedroom clutching her stuffed bear. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Daniel forced a smile and held out his arms. She ran over and climbed onto his lap. He held her tightly, feeling her small warmth. "I'm just thinking, sweetheart." "Don't be sad, Daddy," Ellie said in her clear, gentle voice. "I'll always be with you." Tears slid down Daniel's cheeks. He kissed the top of her head. Trent could play dirty. He could use every trick in the book, but Daniel would not surrender. For this love, he was willing to fight to his very last breath. The rain poured down like a waterfall, pounding a chaotic rhythm against the roof of the old building. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the small apartment. Daniel lay awake on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, as if it might wash away the worries weighing heavily on his shoulders. Then, a scream pierced the night. "No, stop, please. Don't lock me in again." Daniel's heart nearly stopped. He sprang from the bed, stumbling as he ran. Ellie's bedroom door was wide open, with hallway light spilling inside and illuminating his daughter standing in the middle of the room, eyes tightly shut, arms flailing as if fighting off something invisible. "Ellie, sweetheart." Daniel rushed to her, dropping to his knees in front of her. His trembling hands rested on her shoulders. "Daddy's here. I'm here." "Mom? Mom, please don't lock me in the dark closet again." Ellie's voice broke, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm scared. I promise I'll be good. Please don't." Every word struck Daniel like a blow to the chest. The dark closet. What had Rachel done to their daughter? "Ellie, open your eyes and look at me." Daniel said, his voice shaking as he struggled to stay calm. He gently rocked her shoulders. "You're not there anymore. You're safe. Daddy's here." Slowly she opened her eyes, the haze fading as awareness returned. When she saw her father, Ellie burst into tears and clung to him. "Daddy, I dreamed that Mom locked me in the closet every time you went away to work. She said I had to learn to be patient. I screamed, but nobody heard me." Daniel held his daughter tightly, feeling as though his heart were being crushed. All those days on the battlefield, believing his family was safe, while his little girl had been silently suffering. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," he choked out. "I didn't know. I should have been here to protect you." "But you're here now," Ellie whispered, weak but trusting. "I'm not scared anymore." The soft sound of a door opening made Daniel turn. Olivia stood in the doorway, medical bag in hand. She had stopped by to bring him pain medication after seeing how hard it was raining. Concern filled her eyes as she took in the scene. "I heard the noise," she said gently as she stepped inside. "Is she all right?" Daniel nodded, unable to hide the tears on his face. Olivia knelt beside them, looking at Ellie with quiet kindness. "Would you like some warm water?" she asked softly, her voice soothing. Ellie nodded. Olivia gently guided her out of the room, giving Daniel a moment to gather himself. He sank down onto the floor, clutching his head in his hands. The images from Ellie's words replayed over and over, a small child alone in the darkness, screaming with no one to hear her. Daniel, Olivia's voice called, pulling him back. She stood at the doorway, her expression serious. "We need to talk." After Ellie fell back asleep, Daniel and Olivia sat at the kitchen table. Steam rose from untouched cups of tea. She told me everything. Olivia began calm but resolute. Rachel isolated her in a way no one should ever endure, especially not a child. Daniel clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. "I trusted her. I thought Ellie was being cared for while I was away." "You can't blame yourself," Olivia said. "But now you have this information, and you can use it." She was right. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a fight to rescue his daughter from people willing to hurt her for their own gain. The next morning, Olivia called Dr. Nathan Reed, a colleague at Mercy Heights who oversaw patient data systems. "Olivia, I checked as you asked," Nathan said over the phone, his tone grave. "There was unauthorized access to Parker's medical file 3 weeks ago. The IP address isn't from the hospital or the rehab center. Someone accessed the system from outside." "Can you trace it?" Olivia asked. "I'm working with security now. If this is confirmed, it's a serious breach. We'll have an official report in a few days." Olivia ended the call and turned to Daniel, who was sitting on the couch with Ellie asleep in his arms. His face no longer showed confusion or helplessness. Instead, it showed resolve, the resolve of a soldier, of a father. "We're going to win," Olivia said with quiet confidence. Daniel looked down at his daughter and gently brushed her hair. In his mind, the scattered fragments of memory began to come together. He might forget many things, street names, the faces of fellow soldiers, even details of his own past. But he would never forget his duty to protect his daughter. And this time, he would not let anyone, not Rachel, not Trent, not even the legal system itself, take that away from him. "We're going to win," Daniel repeated firmly. "For Ellie." The rain had stopped, and in the faint light of dawn, hope began to rise. The Jefferson County courtroom was steeped in a heavy silence. Daniel sat in a worn suit, the only one he had left from his working days. Across the room, Rachel sat beside Trent, her face cold as ice. Their attorney, a tall man named Martin Cross, stood up holding a remote control. "Your Honor," he said confidently, "we have evidence showing that Mr. Parker is not fit to care for a child." The large screen at the front of the courtroom lit up. A video began to play Daniel in a small room, his face twisted in pain, both hands clutching his head. Then he stood pacing aimlessly, and in a moment of lost control, slammed his head against the wall. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Eyes shifted from the screen to Daniel. This footage was recorded at the rehabilitation center, Attorney Cross explained. "Mr. Esser, Parker frequently experiences uncontrollable outbursts. A person in such a condition cannot guarantee the safety of a young child." Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered that moment, the crushing headache after a nightmare, when memories of the battlefield surged like a tidal wave. But the video showed no context. It showed only a man who had lost control. "Mr. Parker," Judge Hartfield said, her voice firm, yet not without compassion. "Would you like to address the court?" Daniel stood, his legs still slightly unsteady. He looked around the room, faces watching him with suspicion, pity, or disdain. Then his eyes found Olivia seated in the back row, her gaze filled with encouragement. "Your Honor," Daniel began, his voice trembling, "I cannot deny what you've just seen. I have moments, difficult moments, moments when I am fighting myself." He paused and took a deep breath. "But there's one thing I want to make clear. When I woke up in the hospital after my injury, I couldn't remember my own name. I couldn't remember my hometown. I couldn't remember the fellow soldiers who fought beside me. But there was one name, only one name, that remained clear and bright in my mind. Ellie." His voice broke, tears welling in his eyes. "My daughter's the reason I'm still alive. Every morning, no matter how much pain I'm in, I keep going because of her. I relearned how to walk, how to speak, how to do the simplest things, not for myself, but because I want to be the father she deserves." Daniel turned toward Rachel and Trent. There was no fear or anger left in his eyes, only resolve. "I know I'm not perfect. I know I have limitations, but I love my daughter more than anything in this world. And I would give up everything, face any hardship, before I would ever allow her to be harmed." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Hartfield looked at Daniel, her expression softening. Before she could speak, however, the courtroom doors burst open. A young woman around 30, her hair pulled neatly back, hurried inside, clutching a stack of documents. "I'm sorry for the interruption, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "My name is April Thompson. I'm a nurse at Mercy Heights Rehabilitation Center. I have important information related to this case." Attorney Cross jumped to his feet. "Objection. This individual is not on the witness list." "Sit down, Mr. Cross," Judge Hartfield said firmly. She turned to April. "Go on." April stepped forward and placed the documents on the bench. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Trent Wallace approached me and asked for Mr. Parker's medical records. He offered me a large sum of money to alter certain notes to exaggerate Mr. Parker's condition. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Rachel and Trent exchanged panicked looks. "I did it," April continued, her voice cracking. "I did it because I needed money to care for my mother, but I can't live with this lie anymore. These are copies of the original records before they were altered." At that moment, Dr. Nathan Reed entered through the rear doors, holding a tablet. "Your Honor, I'm Nathan Reed, Director of Data Systems at Mercy Heights. We traced the unauthorized access to Mr. Parker's medical file. The IP address belongs to Mr. Trent Wallace's office. Trent leapt to his feet. This is slander. I won't accept silence. Judge Hartfield slammed her gavel down, her voice thunderous. Mr. Wallace, you have the right to remain silent, but I will be ordering a full investigation into these allegations. She turned to Rachel. Mrs. Parker, based on the new evidence presented, I am temporarily suspending your custodial rights pending further investigation. Temporary custody is awarded to Mr. Daniel Parker. The gavel struck the bench again, ringing like a bell of freedom. Daniel dropped to his knees, burying his face in his hands, as tears streamed down, tears not of despair, but of joy, relief, and victory. Olivia stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. You did it. Daniel looked up at her and met her eyes. We did it. And for the first time in a very long while, he felt that he was truly a father, not perfect, but strong enough to protect his daughter. The apartment on Maple Street was filled with the glow of the afternoon sun. Daniel stood by the window looking down at the busy street below. 2 days had passed since the court victory, yet there was still no sense of peace inside him. His body felt exhausted to the bone, sleepless nights, hours of unbearable tension, all of it like a storm that had just swept through. Daddy, I drew this picture for you. Ellie ran over holding a sheet of paper covered in clumsy crayon lines, a tall man standing beside a small girl, both smiling. Daniel knelt down, struggling to keep his balance. It's beautiful, sweetheart. But halfway through the sentence, the world began to spin. The light dimmed, the sounds around him shattered into fragments. His legs suddenly felt weak. Daddy Ellie's voice seemed to come from far away. Then everything went dark. When Daniel opened his eyes, he found himself lying in a hospital bed. Harsh, white-blue lights glared overhead, the familiar smell of disinfectant filling the air. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside him. You're awake. Olivia's voice came softly, laced with worry. She sat by the bed, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. Ellie, Daniel whispered hoarsely. Where's my daughter? She's in the waiting room with Dr. Nathan. She's fine, don't worry. Daniel tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. Olivia gently placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. You had a mild stroke, she explained. Extreme stress combined with your old brain injury caused a relapse. The doctor says you need complete rest. Rest. How could he rest when his daughter needed him? I saw her, Daniel said, his voice trembling. She saw me collapse. I saw the fear in her eyes. She was scared. Yes, but she understands. She's very brave. But Daniel barely heard her. Dark thoughts began to creep into his mind. Was Trent right after all? Was he truly a danger to his own daughter? If he collapsed every time the pressure became too much, how could he possibly protect her? That night, drifting in and out of sedation, Daniel fell into chaotic dreams. He saw himself standing in a dark room, Ellie on the other side, reaching out to him. Daddy, I need you. But every time he tried to move toward her, his legs gave way, his body refusing to obey. She drifted farther and farther away, and Trent's voice echoed through the darkness. You're a burden, Parker. You can't protect her. You only cause her pain. Daniel jolted awake, his shirt soaked with sweat. He stared into the dark hospital room, a crushing sense of loneliness settling over him. Tears slid down his cheeks. Was he being selfish? Was keeping Ellie with him truly the right decision? The next morning, a nurse announced that he had a visitor. Daniel was surprised to see Rachel step into the room. She no longer looked cold and distant. Instead, she appeared worn down, weighed by guilt. Daniel, she began softly. May I have a few minutes? Daniel turned his face away, unwilling to look at her. Why are you here? Rachel sat down in the chair beside the bed, her hands gripping her purse tightly. I came to apologize. Silence pressed heavily between them. I was blind, she continued, her voice shaking. I believed Trent. I believed money and stability were all Ellie needed, but I was wrong. Our daughter doesn't need those things. She needs a father who loves her, and that's you. Daniel still did not turn to face her. It's too late. I know, Rachel said, tears beginning to fall. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I regret it. I hurt both you and Ellie, and now all I want is for my child to have the best life possible. She stood, placing an envelope on the table. These are the papers relinquishing all custodial rights. I won't fight anymore. She belongs with you. Rachel turned and walked out, leaving Daniel alone in the quiet room. After she left, Daniel opened the envelope. Legal documents confirming that Rachel had officially given up custody. This should have been total victory. So why didn't he feel happy Olivia came in carrying a cup of warm water? She saw the papers in Daniel's hand and immediately understood. What are you thinking? She asked gently. Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with confusion. I won. So why does it feel like I lost? Because you're questioning your own worth, Olivia said, sitting beside him. But Daniel, you need to hear this. Collapsing doesn't mean you're weak. It only means you're human, and being human means having limits. But Ellie needs a strong father. She needs a loving father, Olivia interrupted. And that's exactly who you are. You fought with everything you had for her. You overcame every obstacle, not because you're perfect, but because you love her. Daniel remained silent, letting her words sink deep. She doesn't need a superhero, Olivia continued. She just needs you with all your flaws, your limits, and all the love you have for her. This time, Daniel's tears were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of acceptance of himself with all his wounds and weaknesses. I'll keep trying, he whispered. For Ellie? No, Olivia said with a gentle smile. For both you and Ellie. And in that moment, Daniel understood that true victory was not defeating an external enemy, but conquering the demons within fear, doubt, and learning how to love himself. The 5th day in the hospital. Daniel lay staring at the stark white ceiling, counting each tiny crack as if they might somehow give him answers to the questions tormenting his mind. The window was slightly open, a gentle breeze drifting in, carrying with it the laughter and chatter of children from the playground below. Ordinary children with healthy parents, children who didn't have to worry that their father might collapse at any moment. What are you thinking about? Olivia asked as she walked in, a medical chart in her hands. Daniel didn't turn to look at her. Can you help me with something? Olivia set the chart down and took a seat beside him. What is it I need you to find? A good family. A family who can adopt Ellie. The sudden silence fell like a stone dropping. Olivia stared at Daniel, her eyes wide in disbelief. What are you saying? Daniel turned to face her, his eyes filled with pain but also resolve. I can't keep being selfish. My daughter deserves a better life, a father who doesn't make her worry every day, a stable family, a future not overshadowed by the ghosts of war. Daniel. Olivia shook her head. You're making a terrible mistake. No, he interrupted, his voice trembling. I saw the fear in her eyes when I collapsed. I heard her crying when the ambulance arrived. I don't want her to live like that, always afraid, always worried. Ellie is only 5 years old, but she's already carrying too much. Olivia leaned forward, looking straight into his eyes. Have you asked Ellie what she wants? She's too young to understand what's best for her. Or are you afraid to face the truth? Olivia asked gently but sharply. That she needs you, not a perfect version of you, but you exactly as you are, with all your flaws. Daniel said nothing and turned his face away. Olivia sighed and stood. I can't do what you're asking, she said, but I will respect your decision. There's just one thing, talk to Ellie first. She deserves to know. But Daniel didn't see Ellie. Every time she came to visit, he asked the nurses to say he was resting and couldn't receive visitors. He heard her small footsteps pause outside the door, heard Olivia's gentle voice explaining, Your daddy needs some time, sweetheart. Then he heard those small footsteps walk away, slowly, heavier than any 5-year-old steps should ever be. On the afternoon of the 6th day, Dr. Nathan stopped by Daniel's room for a checkup. You're recovering well, he said, jotting notes onto his clipboard. You You should be able to go home in a few days." Daniel nodded absently. Nathan looked at him for a moment, then set the clipboard down. "I heard from Olivia about your decision." Daniel didn't respond. "I'm not a psychologist," Nathan continued. "But as a father, I want to tell you something. Children don't need us to be perfect. They just need us to be there." He paused at the door, then turned back. Out in the hallway, there's a little girl sitting and waiting. She's been there for 3 days, straight from morning until night. She doesn't say much. She just sits and draws. Every drawing shows a man and a little girl. Daniel felt his heart tighten. "Who do you think she's drawing?" Nathan asked quietly, then stepped out. From that moment on, Ellie's image filled Daniel's mind, sitting alone in the hallway, crayons in hand, drawing pictures no one was looking at. He had thought he was doing the right thing. He had believed that letting go was the most selfless act of love. But now he began to doubt. Was this really love, or was it fear disguised as sacrifice? The next morning, Olivia entered the room with a grave expression. "Ellie won't eat," she said. "She's been sitting in the hallway since early this morning. It's almost noon now, and she's refused everything. She keeps saying just one thing. I want to see my daddy." Something shattered inside Daniel. He had tried to protect his daughter by creating distance, but instead he was hurting her even more deeply. "She drew this," Olivia said, handing him a sheet of paper. Daniel took it with trembling hands. The drawing showed 2 figures, an adult and a child holding hands. Above them, in the clumsy handwriting of a 5-year-old, were the words, "Daddy and daughter. Forever." Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the colors. Daniel pressed the drawing to his chest, his body shaking with sobs he could no longer hold back. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was wrong." Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late. She's still waiting for you out there." Daniel wiped his tears and slowly swung his legs off the bed. His legs were still weak, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He stepped out of the room, each step heavy yet steady. In the hallway, morning light streamed through the large windows, and there, curled up on a plastic chair, sat Ellie, crayon in hand, eyes red-rimmed as she stared down at a blank sheet of paper. At the sound of footsteps, she looked up. Their eyes met. "Daddy." Ellie's voice was small, filled with longing. Daniel knelt down and held out his arms. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I was wrong to think that distance was what was best for you. The truth is, I need you too, just as much as you need me." Ellie ran into his arms and held him tightly. They embraced in the quiet hallway, and this time Daniel knew he would never let go again. Because true love is not about letting go. It is about holding on no matter how hard it is. The hospital corridor was bathed in the warm golden light of the afternoon. Daniel and Ellie still held each other tightly, as if letting go might allow that painful distance to return. A few steps away, Olivia stood quietly, watching a gentle smile on her lips. "I missed you so much," Daddy Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you come see me?" Daniel held her closer, taking a deep breath to steady himself. I thought staying away from you was best for you. I was afraid I'd make you sad, make you worry." She pulled back slightly and looked straight into his eyes. "But I'm not sad because you're sick. I'm only sad when you're not with me." Those simple words, spoken by a 5-year-old, carried more weight than any advice from doctors or lawyers. Daniel felt his heart warm, as if after a long winter. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I promise I won't stay away from you again." Ellie smiled, a bright, innocent smile full of trust. She let go of him, ran to the small backpack left on the chair, and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. "I have something I want to give you," she said, her eyes shining. Daniel took the paper and slowly unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing, imperfect in form, but overflowing with feeling. In the picture, a tall man stood in the rain, holding his hand above a small girl's head to shield her. On the man's face were brown crayon marks meant to be scars, but his smile was clear. The sky was dark, rain pouring down, yet the little girl under his protection was smiling safe. Beneath the drawing in uneven but heartfelt handwriting were the words, "Daddy stays. I'm not scared anymore." Daniel stared at the picture, his eyes blurring with tears. His hand trembled as he gently traced each line. "My teacher told us to draw our hero," Ellie explained proudly. "I drew you. It won first prize in my class. My sweetheart." Daniel pressed the drawing to his chest, unable to hold back his sobs. "I'm not a hero, honey. You are my hero," Ellie said firmly, stepping closer. "You fight to stay with me. You don't leave me even when you're hurting. That's what a hero is." Her words cut through the heavy darkness that had weighed on Daniel's heart for so long. He had blamed himself for his flaws, for not being perfect. But to Ellie, he didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be there. Olivia walked over and knelt beside them. I told you," she said, gently looking at Daniel. "She doesn't need a superhero. She just needs you." Daniel nodded, wiping his tears. "I understand now. I was blinded by fear, thinking my love wasn't enough. But now I know love isn't perfection. It's persistence." He looked down at Ellie and softly stroked her hair. "I may not be able to do everything other fathers can, but I will always love you, always try for you, and I will never give up." "I know," Ellie said with a radiant smile. "I've always known." In the days that followed, Daniel began to change. Not a miraculous physical transformation. He still needed crutches to walk, still suffered from severe headaches, still spent hours in therapy forcing his body to obey. But the greatest change was in his spirit. He no longer saw himself as a burden. Instead, he saw himself as a father, imperfect but determined. Olivia continued to visit not only as a nurse but as a friend, a companion. She taught Daniel new exercises and encouraged him not to give up when things got hard. "You're doing very well," she said one afternoon after Daniel completed a particularly difficult exercise. "Because of you," Daniel replied, looking at her with gratitude. "You didn't give up on me even when I wanted to give up on myself." Olivia smiled. "That's because I knew the strength was already there. You just needed someone to remind you." 1 week after being discharged, Daniel and Ellie sat in their small living room, afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. Ellie was working on a new drawing while Daniel sat beside her reading aloud from a book. Daddy, Ellie paused and looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Does it still hurt?" Daniel stopped and thought for a moment. "Yes, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. Because I know that no matter how much it hurts, I still have you by my side." Ellie nodded and returned to her drawing. She added a small house, a bright sun, and 2 hands holding tightly together. Daniel watched his daughter, his heart filled with a peace he had never known before. He had once believed the battlefield was the hardest place to survive. But the real battle, the battle within himself against fear and self-doubt, had been the greatest challenge of all. And he had won, not because he was strong, but because he had a reason to fight. Ellie's drawing "Daddy Stays. I'm Not Scared Anymore" was framed and hung on the living room wall. Every time Daniel looked at it, he remembered this hope is not something you find at the end of the road. It's something you carry with you along the way. And his journey, though still difficult, was now filled with hope, because he was no longer alone. Autumn arrived early that year. Yellow leaves drifted down across the streets, carpeting the sidewalks like a soft blanket. Daniel stood by the apartment window, looking out, a warm cup of coffee in his hand. 3 months had passed since his discharge from the hospital, and life was slowly finding its own rhythm again. On the table, the local newspaper lay open to the news section. A small headline caught his eye: "Trent Wallace disbarred, following medical records fraud scandal." Daniel picked up the paper and skimmed the article. After evidence of falsified medical records came to light, the Bar Association launched an investigation and concluded that Trent had committed serious professional misconduct. He lost everything: his career, his reputation, and the relationships he had built over the years. Daniel set the paper down. He felt none of the sense of victory he had once imagined. Instead, there was only emptiness. Trent had destroyed himself through greed and manipulation, but Daniel no longer hated him. Hatred was just another burden, and he had carried enough burdens already. A week later, Rachel appeared at the park where Daniel often took Ellie on weekends. She didn't approach right away. Instead, standing at a distance beneath the shade of an old oak tree, watching her daughter play on the swings. Daniel noticed her but said nothing. He sat on a bench watching Ellie laugh as she pumped her legs higher and higher. After a while, Rachel walked over and stopped a few steps away. "May I sit?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded. Rachel sat down, her hands clasped together, her eyes never leaving her daughter. "She's grown so much," she whispered. "I missed so much." Daniel remained silent. Rachel turned to him, tears welling in her eyes. "I know an apology can't make up for what I've done," she said, "but I want you to know that I truly regret it. I was blind, trusted the wrong person, and I hurt both you and Ellie." Daniel looked toward Ellie. She was climbing the slide, waving at him with a bright smile. He waved back, then turned to Rachel. "I don't hate you," he said calmly. "Hatred only hurts the one who carries it. But I can't forget what happened either. Ellie went through too much pain." I know Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not asking to come back into her life. I just want to see her sometimes, even from a distance like this." "That's enough." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I've started volunteering at a rehabilitation center for veterans. I want to help people like you, people who gave so much and were left behind. It's the only way I know how to make amends." Daniel looked at Rachel, the woman he had once loved and trusted. Now she was a stranger, burdened with deep regret. He felt no anger, no lingering pain, only compassion. "I hope you find peace," Daniel said. "And if one day Ellie wants to see you, I won't stand in the way. But that has to be her decision." Rachel nodded and stood. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." She took one last look at Ellie, then turned and walked away, gradually disappearing among the falling yellow leaves. That afternoon, Olivia stopped by with a box of homemade cookies. She and Daniel sat in the kitchen while Ellie drew pictures in the living room. "You saw Rachel?" Olivia asked, pouring tea. "Yes," Daniel nodded. "She's changed, or at least she's trying to." "How do you feel?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Relieved. I've let go of the past, not because she deserves forgiveness, but because I deserve freedom." Olivia smiled. "That's a big step, Daniel." He looked at her, the woman who had stood by him through the hardest months, not out of obligation or self-interest, but out of kindness and genuine care. "There's something I want to say to you," Daniel began hesitantly. Olivia set her cup down and looked at him, waiting. "I know I'm far from ideal. I carry a lot of scars, physical and emotional. But having you by my side makes everything feel more manageable. And I was wondering whether you might want to keep being with you?" Olivia finished, her eyes bright. "Yes, Daniel. I do." It felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted from his chest. "I can't promise it will be easy. There will still be days when I have to fight myself. And I'll be there," Olivia interrupted, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Not because I think you need saving, but because I want to share life with you, the good days, the hard ones, all of it." Daniel squeezed her hand, warmth spreading through him. That night, after Ellie fell asleep, Daniel sat alone in the living room. His eyes rested on the framed drawing on the wall, "Daddy Stays." "I'm not scared anymore." His life had once felt like ashes after a great fire, but from those ashes, new life had begun to grow. Ellie was the first spark, hope rising from the ruins, and now Olivia was part of that rebirth as well. Daniel didn't know what the future would bring. He still had therapy ahead of him, still suffered headaches, still had nightmares of the battlefield. But now he was no longer fighting alone. He had Ellie, his brave, resilient daughter, his reason to keep going. He had Olivia, a steadfast companion, a new source of strength. And most importantly, he had himself a new Daniel, imperfect but full of hope. Ashes can be an ending, but they can also be a beginning. And Daniel chose the beginning. 1 year later. The small room at the Jefferson Community Center was filled with warm afternoon light. The walls were covered with children's drawings, bright, colorful images of family hope and dreams. Daniel stood in the middle of a circle of 10 children, holding a picture book in his hands. Today, he said, his voice warm and steady. We're going to talk about heroes. But not the heroes from movies or comic books. We're going to talk about heroes in real life. A boy of about 8 raised his hand. Mr. Daniel, who are real-life heroes? Daniel smiled and knelt down to meet the boy at eye level. Real-life heroes are people who don't give up even when things are hard. They can be your parents, your teachers, or even yourselves. But I'm not strong like a hero, another little girl said softly. Strength isn't just muscles or superpowers, Daniel explained. Strength is being afraid and still moving forward. Strength is falling down and getting back up. And strength is loving others even when you're hurting yourself. The children's eyes looked at him with new understanding. This was the class Daniel had started after receiving his disability benefits, a free storytelling and art therapy program for the children of veterans and for kids who had been through difficult experiences. So are you a hero too? The 8-year-old boy asked. Daniel shook his head gently. I'm just an ordinary person doing the best I can. But you fought and protected the country, another girl said. That's a hero. Daniel looked at their innocent, open faces. If you see it that way, then I'm honored. But I believe real heroes don't need armor or magic. They only need the courage to stay and to love even when the storm hasn't passed. That afternoon, Daniel returned to the apartment on Maple Street, now renovated, no longer worn and shabby like it once was. The walls had been repainted a warm cream color, the wooden floors polished, and everywhere were the signs of a happy family. Ellie, now 6 years old, taller and quicker, ran to greet him the moment the door opened. Daddy's home, she shouted, hugging his legs. Daniel bent down and hugged his daughter. What did you learn at school today? We learned about planets. The teacher said Mars is red because it has a lot of iron. Did you know that? Daddy, I sure did, Daniel laughed. My daughter's very smart. Olivia came out from the kitchen, an apron tied around her waist, a wooden spoon in her hand. You're home just in time. I made your favorite ribs tonight. Daniel stepped over and kissed her gently on the cheek. Thank you. They sat together around the dinner table, a small, simple family, but full of warmth. Ellie talked excitedly about her school day. Olivia shared stories from her hospital shift, and Daniel told them about the children in his class. You're doing something very meaningful, Olivia said, her eyes soft. Those children are lucky to have you. No, Daniel shook his head. I'm the lucky one, to be alive, to be with the people I love, and to share what life has taught me. That night it rained. Raindrops tapped rhythmically against the windows, creating a gentle symphony. In the living room, warm yellow light fell over the three of them. Daniel, Olivia, and Ellie curled up together on the old sofa. Olivia held a book and read aloud softly. And from that day on, the little prince learned that the most important thing in life is not finding perfection, but finding people who love us with all our flaws. Ellie rested her head on her father's shoulder, her eyes closed, still listening to every word. Daniel wrapped one arm around his daughter, his other hand holding Olivia's. Outside, the rain continued washing away the last traces of worry and pain. But inside this small, cozy apartment, there was only peace. Daniel looked around at Ellie drifting off to sleep, at Olivia reading on in her gentle voice, at the drawings on the wall, at the life he once thought he had lost forever. He had been a soldier fighting on distant battlefields. He had lost many things, his health, his memories, even his faith in himself. But he had found what mattered most, love and a reason to live. Life is not always fair. It pushes people into harsh trials in their darkest moments. But it is in those moments that people discover their true strength, not the strength to conquer, but the strength to love, to forgive, and to go on. Olivia closed the book and smiled at Daniel. She's asleep. Daniel looked down at Ellie, her breathing slow and steady, her face peaceful. He carefully lifted her, carried her to her bedroom, tucked her into bed, and kissed her gently on the forehead. "I love you," he whispered. When he returned to the living room, Olivia was standing by the window looking out at the rain. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked as he stepped beside her. "I'm thinking," Olivia said, resting her head on his shoulder, "that life is truly miraculous. Even with storms and hardships, there are moments like this after all." Daniel held her close and looked out the window. The rain still fell, but through it he saw streetlights shimmering, saw life continuing still full of hope. "Real heroes don't need armor or magic," he said, echoing the words he had spoken to the children that morning. "They only need the courage to stay and to love even when the storm hasn't passed." Olivia looked up at him. "And you've done exactly that." Daniel smiled, a genuine smile free of pain or doubt. "Not alone. I have you, I have Ellie. I have everyone who never gave up on me." They stood there holding each other, listening to the rain, listening to the rhythm of life. And in that moment, Daniel understood happiness is not a destination. It is a journey with the people we love, through storms and sunshine, through falls and victories. And he had found his happiness, not in perfection, but in acceptance, not in wealth, but in love. The story of Daniel Parker, the soldier, the father, the quiet hero, did not end in glory or fame. It ended in peace, and that above all else was the greatest victory of all. The story of Daniel and Ellie reminds us that the greatest strength does not lie in never falling down, but in staying through pain, through fear, and when love becomes the hardest choice of all. It takes just one person who refuses to let go to save a childhood and heal a life. If this story touched you, please follow and share it to help spread journeys of love, resilience, and hope. Because somewhere out there are still Ellies waiting to be protected, and Daniels who have yet to realize that they are already heroes.